The prices of some things have actually begun to fall a little bit over the past few months, but not nearly as much as you might have expected, and not nearly as many different products and services are seeing their prices go down. In fact, some are continuing to go up, even though all those things that we were told over the last year and a half were leading to inflation aren't true anymore. It's weird that the prices aren't dropping, and apparently, according to the New York Times, get used to it. So they say some of the world's biggest companies have said they do not plan to change course and will continue increasing prices or keep them at elevated levels for the foreseeable future. That strategy has cushioned corporate profits, and it could keep inflation robust, contributing to the very pressures used to justify surging prices. We have a statement from Albert Edwards, global strategist at Societe Generale, who says companies are not just maintaining margins, not just passing on cost increases, they have used it as a cover to expand margins. Hugh Johnston, CFO of PepsiCo, said, I don't think our margins are gonna deteriorate at all. In fact, what we said for the year is we'll be at least even with 2022 and may in fact increase margins during the course of the year. And those are anecdotal, but when you look at the S&P 500 stock index, it's increased its net profit margin from the end of last year, the average company has. And while margins are below their peak back in 2021, it is expected that they will continue to expand in the second half of the year. And that is amazing to me, amazing. It almost seems like the corporations are raising prices because they can, that's why prices are high, not because of Ukraine or because of the pandemic or because of a train derailment or whatever, that it's just the greed of the corporations. And the reason that my mind is so blown is that it is amazing that the New York Times is finally admitting this. It's amazing that we've now just come to the point as a society where we accept that that's what's causing it. Because at one point, I will remind you, there was this Catherine Rampell opinion piece in Washington Post that perfectly summed up how the status quo, how the establishment responded to people like Bernie Sanders and AOC pointing out that greed was causing inflation. They said it was a conspiracy theory infecting the Democratic Party, specifically Catherine Rampell. That was the title of her op-ed. That the idea that greed is causing inflation was a conspiracy theory infecting the Democratic Party. Now we have a year of wildly inflated corporate profits that have now been locked in, and that is the new status quo. And now it's just accepted. There's nothing that's gonna be done about this. So the New York Times is finally freed up to admit that's what's actually happening. Because we don't expect that anything's gonna be done. What do you think?
The Cassandras of inflation, we're just not listened to. That's the whole thing with Cassandras, right? But the Cassandras of inflation now are also not being like, we told you so, because it's not great to be in this situation. It's too late because we've already had Jerome Powell raising interest rates for months and months, saying that that's gonna address inflation, making the mistake that it was inflation on the supply side. The problem was not that people across the United States of America had more dollars than they knew what to do with, and we saw too many dollars chasing too few goods. It just wasn't the situation, and we know that to be true when we see corporations raising prices simply because they can. How do we know that? It's very basic math. If they had additional input costs, you would not see higher profit margins. That would be cut out of their revenue as a part of the cost. It's not more expensive for them to create the goods and services. They didn't increase wages. There were not additional input costs. It's all profit. It's insanity. And the supply and demand of the market right now, like we would expect if prices went up so high, there would be some people not willing to pay for them and they would drop off. But the things that they're raising prices on are things that we cannot do without. Things like energy, gas to put in our cars so we can go to work, energy so we can heat our homes and not freeze to death in the wintertime. It's food, it's groceries, it's rent, it's stuff that we have no choice but to buy. And then the other things they're raising prices on, they can raise prices on them and then maybe less people will buy them, but they've raised prices such a significant amount that they can cut some costs by making less and still make the same or more amount of money by literally doing less work because their market is smaller, but they're getting away with the prices being so high. It's like a ridiculous economy that works for literally no one but the corporations. And with wages stagnant since the 70s, who's gonna buy your goods and services after a certain point? Like you can't squeeze the workers that much. They're also the consumers. Like they're not gonna be able to afford your products at a certain point. It's unsustainable even for you.
You would think that was a great explanation of it. It is very easy to follow. which is why it has been so frustrating over the past couple of years that everyone in a position of power refused to admit it. Now, it makes sense that they refuse to admit it. They want corporate profits to be higher. The people writing opinion pieces in the Washington Post are not detached from the stock market. The Washington Post certainly isn't. They liked that companies were greedy and were raising prices. They liked that there was a societal excuse for doing that. And it was maybe second only to the frustration that I had from watching our country seem to come to a collective agreement that it's okay to let hundreds of thousands of people needlessly die during a public health crisis. The fact that as this was happening, we had a few politicians like Bernie Sanders who were continually pointing out that there is no justifiable cause for gas prices to be as high as they were. And seemingly, basically every Democrat and every single Republican, many of whom like to pretend that they're anti-elite or whatever because they hate Bud Light, made a million excuses for the oil companies and for the food production companies and all of that. And people suffered. And now it looks like it's locked in for the long haul. It was all incredibly obvious. If you were watching this program, if you were paying attention to what was going on, you knew what was happening. But all the people with the money and the power and the influence wouldn't accept it because they had a financial incentive not to. That sucked. But thank you, New York Times, for catching up to where we were at a year and a half ago.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.